I used to keep my sleeves down, even in the hottest days of August, when the classroom smelled of chalk dust and sweat. Kids thought it was weird. Some whispered that I was hiding tattoos. Others snickered that I just didn't know how to dress. The truth was far less glamorous. Beneath that thin cotton fabric, my arms were a road map of scars, faint and jagged, like someone had etched their secrets into my skin long ago. They weren't fresh. They were the kind of scars you earn over years of surviving things you never talk about at lunch tables. At first, the teasing was almost harmless. Just names thrown across the hallway, giggles in gym class. But when one boy, Tanner, the quarterback's son, decided to make me his personal punchline, it became relentless. Every day, he'd tug at my sleeve, call me Frankenstein or Patchwork, and everyone around him would laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I learned to swallow my anger, to walk faster, to disappear. Then came the day everything shifted. It was after school, and I was waiting at the edge of the parking lot for my bus when Tanner's father showed up. I'd seen him before, a tall man in a dark suit, always on the phone, always with that air of untouchable wealth. But that afternoon he wasn't distracted. He saw Tanner grab my wrist and yank my sleeve up, exposing the pale lines on my arm to the open air. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, silent, staring at the scars like they were telling him something no one else could hear. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift. Tanner was still laughing, but it rang hollow. His father's eyes were fixed on me, and I realized he knew something. Or maybe he saw something he recognized. Whatever it was, his silence felt heavier than any words. And in that heavy silence, I knew my life was about to change. Because sometimes, the moment someone stops laughing is the moment the truth begins to speak. After that moment in the parking lot, I couldn't shake the image of Tanner's father staring at me. Not blinking, not frowning, just watching, like my scars had unlocked a memory inside him. The next day, the atmosphere at school was strangely different. Tanner was quieter, less loud in his mockery, though his friends still tried to pick up the slack. But I noticed his eyes flickering, restless, like he was waiting for something to happen. Let me back up a little. My name's Daniel. I wasn't always the kid people laughed at. When I was younger, before the scars, I was just normal. I played tag. I built forts in the woods. I thought the world was a safe place. But accidents and choices, none of them really mine, etched those marks into me. I won't go into the full story now. Just know that each line carried a history, one I'd worked hard to bury. School wasn't a place for history. It was a place to survive the present. My bus rides were my refuge. I'd sit alone, watching the blur of trees and houses, imagining stories for the people inside. A family gathered around a dinner table. A father coming home with laughter instead of silence. My own house wasn't like that. My mom worked double shifts at the hospital, and my stepfather, well, let's just say he never asked me about my day. He had his own ways of teaching lessons, and those lessons often left marks. Which is why, when Tanner's father stared at me, it felt like a spotlight had been switched on. I didn't want anyone from his world, the suits, the shiny cars, the perfect lawns, to know about mine. Wealthy families like his had no idea what it meant to patch yourself together after nights of storm. And yet, something told me he did. That silence was too knowing, too familiar. I found myself wondering, if he understood, would he expose me? Or protect me? The following week, the test began, though I didn't recognize it as a test at the time. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was leaving the library late. Tanner's father was waiting outside in a sleek black car, engine running. For a second, I thought I was in trouble, that maybe Tanner had told him some twisted version of events. But instead of calling me over with authority, he simply lowered the window and asked, "Daniel, do you need a ride?" My first instinct was no, absolutely not. Accepting help meant owing something, and I had learned the hard way that debts always came due. But there was something in his tone, calm, not commanding. I nodded and got in. The car smelled like leather and aftershave, a world away from the fried food tang of the school bus. He didn't drive off immediately. He just sat there, hands resting on the wheel, and finally said, "Those scars. I've seen men with arms like that. Not boys. Men." His eyes flicked toward me, steady but not prying. "You don't have to tell me anything, but know that I notice." That was the first rule of his test. He wasn't asking for confessions, only honesty and silence. Over the next few days, strange little situations kept happening. He would appear at school events, stand at the back of the gym during basketball practice, or stop by the library. Never speaking much, just watching. And Tanner, strangely enough, stopped mocking me altogether. It was like his father's quiet attention had frozen him in place. One Friday, Tanner's father handed me something. A folded scarf, deep navy with thin silver stripes. For the cold mornings, he said simply. That was the second rule. Accept kindness without suspicion. The scarf wasn't flashy, but it was warm. When I wrapped it around my neck, I realized he was watching for something. Not my gratitude, but whether I could carry dignity in a gift. It became clear then. He was testing me. Not my strength in fighting back against Tanner, but something deeper. My endurance. My character. Whether I could walk with scars and still hold my head high. And somewhere deep inside, I understood this wasn't just about me. This was about him too. Because the way he looked at those scars, it was as though he had his own invisible ones. At first, I thought it was coincidence, his appearances, his silence, his strange gestures. But then, piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape. Every time I crossed paths with Tanner's father, there was something deliberate about it. Once, he lingered in the grocery store where my mom worked, buying just a carton of milk and then standing in her checkout line even though others were shorter. He greeted her politely, but his eyes flicked to me, measuring. Another time, I caught him at the town library, not reading, not even pretending, just sitting at a table near the window where I usually studied. He always gave me the same nod, as if to say, I see you. Keep going. I started wondering, why me? Why would a man like him, wealthy, respected, untouchable in this town, pay attention to a boy like me? The scarf became my companion, almost a symbol. I wore it every morning, and somehow, its presence gave me a little courage to face the hallways. But there were riddles hidden in his silence. One afternoon, when Tanner had left early for practice, his father found me outside the school gates. He said something curious. Do you know what defines a man, Daniel? It isn't how he hides his scars. It's how he carries them so others don't stumble over the same stones. His words sat heavy, like they were borrowed from his own past. That night, I lay awake replaying it. Carry scars so others don't stumble. Did that mean he had scars too? Invisible ones? Maybe Tanner didn't even know about them. Maybe the reason his father was silent when he first saw mine was because they mirrored something locked in his own history. The real puzzle wasn't about him, though. It was about me. Could I let someone like him into my truth? Or would I always keep my sleeves rolled down, my guard up? The more I thought about it, the more I realized. This man wasn't just testing me. He was inviting me into something, though I had no idea yet whether it was trust or a trap. All I knew was this. The scarf around my neck, and the way he watched me carry it, meant the game had only just begun. The revelation came on a gray Saturday morning, colder than it should have been for that time of year. I was walking downtown, scarf wrapped tight, when I spotted Tanner's father sitting alone on a bench outside the courthouse. His posture was different that day. No polished confidence, no air of superiority. Just a man hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands like they carried a weight no one else could see. I hesitated, but before I could turn away, he lifted his head and motioned me over. Daniel, he said quietly, you remind me of someone I used to know. His voice cracked, not much, but enough to make me pause. He looked at my scarf, then at my arms, and continued. I grew up with a father who thought scars were the only language worth teaching. My brothers and I, we were those lessons for years. For a moment, the silence between us was thick, like two rivers meeting. Then he added, you're not the only one who's learned how to survive. That was the moment it clicked. His silence back in the parking lot wasn't just recognition, it was memory. The test wasn't random, and it wasn't pity. He had lived something parallel, and he was measuring whether I would let my scars define me, or whether I could walk with them and still choose kindness. The air felt sharp in my lungs as I realized something else. If Tanner's father had endured the same kind of pain, then Tanner himself was unknowingly living in the shadow of it. The cruelty Tanner showed me wasn't strength. It was fragility passed down like an heirloom. The revelation was simple, yet it shook me. Scars weren't shameful, they were shared. Mine, his, maybe even Tanner's in ways I couldn't see. And with that understanding came a flicker of power I hadn't felt before. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning to see that my scars carried a story bigger than humiliation. The puzzle wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about choosing what story I would let those scars tell. The revelation might have given me strength, but it didn't make life suddenly simple. In fact, it made things more complicated. Because once I understood that Tanner's father had scars of his own, I couldn't stop noticing the cracks in their perfect family image. At school, Tanner's behavior grew erratic. Some days, he left me alone completely, almost skittish, like my presence reminded him of something he didn't want to face. Other days, he lashed out harder, making snide comments, throwing a ball a little too hard in gym, or cornering me in the hall with a fake smile. His cruelty wasn't funny anymore. It was desperate. His friends noticed too, and the laughter that used to echo behind him started to falter. One afternoon in the locker room, Tanner sneered, "What, you think my dad likes you now? He doesn't. He just feels sorry for freaks like you." His voice cracked on the word dad, and I realized his anger wasn't about me at all. It was about the invisible war happening in his own house. But the real complication came when his father started asking me for small favors. Odd little tasks that didn't seem connected at first. "Help me carry these boxes to the church pantry. Read this passage aloud for me. I want to hear how it sounds. Walk with me around the block. It clears my head." Each task was harmless, but together they formed another layer of the test. He wasn't just watching me. He was involving me. And with every step, Tanner's resentment grew. I could feel his eyes burning whenever his father and I exchanged a quiet word or a respectful nod. Then, one evening, it all came to a head. My mom called me into the kitchen, holding an envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded note in sharp handwriting. "You don't belong with us. Stay away from my father, or I'll make sure everyone knows what those scars really mean." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Tanner had drawn a small, mocking sketch of a stitched-up arm at the bottom. My stomach dropped, because this wasn't just about schoolyard teasing anymore. Tanner was drawing battle lines, and I had to decide whether to retreat or finally confront what those scars meant out loud. I didn't sleep that night. The note sat on my desk like a weight, daring me to fold, daring me to crawl back into silence. Part of me wanted to. It would have been easier, just keep my sleeves down, avoid Tanner, and fade into the background again. But something about the scarf around my neck, its steady warmth, reminded me I couldn't go back. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. The following Monday, Tanner cornered me in the hallway. His friends flanked him, but they were quieter now, less sure of the game. He shoved me against a locker, not hard enough to bruise, but enough to make a scene. "So," he hissed, "you think you're special? Think you can replace me as my dad's project?" His eyes were wild, darting as if he feared his father might appear at any moment. "I don't want to replace you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I just exist, Tanner. That bothers you more than it should." He grabbed at my sleeve, trying once again to expose the scars. But this time, I didn't resist. I let him pull it up, let the pale lines breathe in the fluorescent light of the hallway. Gasps echoed around us. "Yes," I said loudly enough for the others to hear. "I have scars. You think that makes me weak?" "No. It means I survived." For the first time, Tanner froze. His grip slackened. His face flushed, not with triumph, but with something else. Shame, maybe, or fear. His friends shuffled uncomfortably, their smirks fading. And then, like fate had planned it, Tanner's father appeared at the end of the hallway. He didn't raise his voice, didn't stride forward in anger. He simply stood there, silent as ever, his eyes fixed on his son. The silence spread like wildfire. The crowd of students melted away, leaving Tanner and me under the heavy gaze of his father. In that moment, Tanner's mask cracked. His hand dropped from my arm, and he muttered, "This isn't over." But his voice lacked conviction. He walked away, shoulders hunched, his father's silence trailing him like a shadow. I stood there, heart pounding, sleeves still rolled up, scars exposed. But this time, no laughter followed. Only a heavy, reverent quiet. Because sometimes, the bravest confrontation isn't in fists or shouts. It's in refusing to hide. The days after that hallway moment felt strangely lighter, though tension still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Students no longer laughed at me openly. Some avoided my eyes. Others gave small nods of respect, but the cruel giggles had gone. Tanner, however, grew more withdrawn. He still glared at me across classrooms, but his energy had shifted. The bravado was gone. It was as if my refusal to hide had exposed not just my scars, but his own weakness. And then, the final reveal came. One evening, as I was leaving the library, I found Tanner's father waiting by the entrance. He held something in his hand, a small, worn photograph. He handed it to me without a word. It was an old picture of him as a boy, maybe 12, standing shirtless in a backyard. Across his torso, faint but visible, were scars not unlike my own. They were less defined with age, but unmistakable. He said quietly, "I thought I'd buried those years. But when I saw you, Daniel, it all came back. I realized silence can be a prison, or it can be a shield. I chose silence for too long. And my son, he grew up not knowing the truth." His eyes darkened, voice rough with regret. He mistook cruelty for strength. That's on me. I stared at the photo, the boy who would one day become the man standing before me. For the first time, I understood that Tanner's father hadn't been testing me out of curiosity. He had been trying to see if someone like me, scarred but unbroken, could help him break a cycle he hadn't managed to end himself. "You carry your scars differently," he said, "and that gives me hope. Don't underestimate the legacy of how you carry them." He pressed the photograph into my hand, then walked away, his figure swallowed by the night. I stood there trembling, scarf warm around my neck, the photo clutched in my palm. For the first time, my scars didn't feel like a curse. They felt like a key, unlocking not just my own strength, but a chance to change the story for others who came after me. The legacy wasn't the scars themselves. It was the choice to wear them with dignity, and to never let them turn into chains for someone else. Life didn't transform overnight. My scars were still there, and whispers didn't vanish completely. But something fundamental had shifted. They no longer carried the same power over me, or over the people around me. Tanner kept his distance, quieter, his swagger dimmed. Sometimes I caught him watching me, not with hate exactly, but with something closer to confusion, maybe even envy. It wasn't that I had defeated him. It was that I had shown him a version of strength he didn't understand, one his father clearly wished he would learn. At home, I began to open up to my mom, just a little at a time. I let her see the scarf, told her how I'd gotten it, and for once, her eyes softened in relief instead of worry. I think she realized I was finding guides in unexpected places, people who could see me not as damaged, but as resilient. And every time I reached for that photograph tucked inside my notebook, I remembered Tanner's father's words. Scars can be prisons, or they can be shields. I chose the shield. I chose to let my story mean something beyond pain. The legacy of those scars wasn't shame anymore. It was testimony. Proof that survival can grow into strength, that silence can turn into voice, and that kindness, quiet, unassuming kindness, can break the cruelest cycles. So if you've ever felt like your scars make you less, let me tell you what I had to learn the hardest way. They don't. They are proof that you are still here. Proof that you've endured, and that you have a story worth carrying forward. And maybe, just maybe, your courage to stop hiding will give someone else the strength to do the same. Because sometimes, all it takes is refusing to laugh, refusing to hide, and standing silently beside another scarred soul to change everything.